Celeste is the only game I can currently think about that has me completely split. If you're someone who's talked about Celeste with me before I played too much of this game, I sang its praise. I said what I'd played was responsive, tight, and everything OST and visual were amazing. That all quickly changed, however, with the game being fully in my hands. You see, the first time I played this game, I only did the prologue bit and then roughly 10 minutes of chapter 1, so I only had to go off good things to say. Poor little naive me didn't realize that this was a rage game. Let's pump the brakes here for a second. Let's draw the lines of what I do like and what I don't like about the game. Starting off with what I do like, Celeste's opening is very well paced. The prologue lets you learn the controls within a very split few seconds while giving you a taste of the game's feel and atmosphere, as well as sprinkling in a little bit of the story to get your whistle wet. Chapters 1 and 2 then start to show you what this game is really all about, mixing in new mechanics and helping you learn the platforming feel while not quite holding your hand. Everything flows so well in this chunk of the game. I never once felt like I couldn't beat a section after dying a few times with trial and error, and even on the optional little strawberry challenges that are littered throughout the game, I found a lot of them in this section of the game quite enjoyable. Now for my next point, let me just say I've been in love with all sorts of video game music from a very young age, from the likes of the simplicity of Crash 2's soundtrack, all the way up to the kick-ass tunes of Persona 5.
Looking cool, Joker. Let's go. Okay, guys.
And the beautifully reorchestrated Kingdom Hearts remasters. And what do you know, jumping up there with the greats is Celeste's soundtrack. It's never bad. Never once does it dip below the threshold it starts with. It's great. It might be a little uneasy sometimes, but that's usually when the feel's intended. It's outstanding. The last time I was this blown away by a soundtrack, it was when frickin' Undertale came out over 3 years ago. Oh my god, Undertale came out over 3 years ago. I'm old. That little musical ditty that plays when you finish a chapter is not only relieving, but it also comes with amazing artwork as your reward for completing that section of the game. Reach for the Summit is outstanding. It's 12 minutes in length for your final stretch of the game's main story in Chapter 7, which you actually hear part of each chapter's music mixed in with this track. It wraps everything up nicely, and it truly got me pumped up to die. It also happens to be the track I was listening to quite a lot when I was in a rut writing the script. I have an issue with low motivation sometimes, and every time I reached the song in the OST, it always got me pumped to write it. Confronting myself has given me chills every single time I've listened to it. It gets me all excited every single time because of the context of what's going on during the chapter. I love it, but I can't talk about it yet because it's spoilers and... I'm honestly not even sure what track of the OST is my favorite. It's that good. Confronting myself and reaching for the summit, they combat for my favorite, but honestly, the whole soundtrack, it really is that good. And there to complement everything else is obviously the beautiful art and the story. As you can see for yourself, this game is visually great, a pure treat for the eyes. The animations have nice use of squash and stretch to have a very satisfying and speedy gameplay style. I don't really want to spoil much of the story yet, but just as a little brief overview, its telling of depression, anxiety, self-worth, and acceptance are outstandingly well handled, and I enjoyed it immensely. In turn, the characters are all well handled, and the interactions between the main character Madeline and a man she found on the mountain, Theo, are filled with some very needed comic relief and nice calm interactions. Okay, I could go without that part. To contrast this is the controlling, harsh, and fearing part of Madeline that splits from her while she's on the mountain, leading to more bickering and mean-spirited conversations, though I'll dive more in depth about those later. But this also transitions fairly nicely into the little thing of how the characters sound. It's very nicely handled in my opinion. You can always tell which people are speaking and how they're feeling just with the tone of their little peeps of sound. It's a nice touch, I liked it. But for now, let's get to the stuff I don't like. I already said I loved the prologue and the first 2 chapters of the game, but why only them? I mean, I like Chapter 5 too, but what about 3, 4, 6, and 7? Chapter 3, in my opinion, has a difficulty spike that comes out of nowhere. Screens get longer with way too many moving little evil dust bunny type enemies. They're weird. At this point in the game, I started really having difficulty focusing on where I was going. I was trying to focus on all these little moving dust bunnies on the screen while trying to also focus on what platform I had to land on or wall jump off of without worrying about nicking my head or toe on them. That quickly got the better of me, even though they were introduced slowly enough. In Chapter 4, you have to deal with these odd platforms that you sometimes have to control with your stick, but at the same time, since I'm trying to use the stick to move around, I found myself slipping off constantly trying to move them in the right direction. And then, the wind. Oh my god, I hate the wind. I found it extremely annoying in almost every screen that the wind was in. It pushes you exactly the way you'd expect it, but there's certain jumps that if you don't nail it perfectly, you die. It wasn't the biggest pain, but it certainly wasn't fun to deal with most of the time. This was also unfortunately the part of the game where I really started to give up on strawberry challenges. Because I'd get so frustrated with the rest of the main path, I'd often just walk in, see the optional strawberry, and walk right back out. It happened several times. In Chapter 6, you're introduced to the feather, which I like the idea of it symbolically, but I found it controlled so sensitively that I'd smack into the tight platforming areas in this part of the game. Which brings up another point. I played this game with a controller, and I'm sure almost everyone else did as well, but I found a few moments where I'd be holding up left or up right, and I'd end up dashing straight up or to the side. It might have just been the controller I was using, but I never had an issue with it like that before. I think I'd notice a problem like that too, because it's the same controller I learned fighters with. That game gets pretty precise most of the time. Just look at that combo. I'm beating that guy. With precision. I should now bring up the big issue with the final climb to the summit in Chapter 7. There are way too many kill spikes absolutely everywhere. You start slowly noticing that there's an abundance of them in the game, but half the chapter is mostly just dealing with the spikes with one extra thing thrown in every once in a great while. They could have done something so much better than this for the finale. They smartly used the assets from each chapter at the start, showing a lovely progression of your journey, even though that just means you're gonna have to go through the stuff that you don't like about the game. But it just dropped in Spike City afterwards. I mean, I liked the sections of the chapter where you were literally climbing the edge of the mountain, so I would have loved if they just toyed with that idea a little bit more. Maybe added some mechanic to make things fast and cool with the clouds they were using instead of just making it boring Spikes bonanza. And evidently, these one-hit kill spikes legitimately got me yelling with rage. Not many games get that out of me anymore. Let's just say... I died a lot. Alright, so I really need to talk about spoilers and summarize the story to help get across how I feel about this game. Skip to the time shown on the screen to avoid this section if you're going to play the game for yourself or watch someone play it or whatever you do. All good? Alright, here we go. I currently have an attachment to this game after finishing it. I'm easy to temporarily impress with games and movies and such, but it's hard to have a lasting impression stuck on me. And Celeste's story and its trio of main characters left an impact on me that I was honestly not expecting. A woman named Madeline feels the need to climb a mountain to push herself in a healthier direction mentally, to finally stop putting things off, to stop being lazy, and to get a grip on her self-doubt and anxiety. In Chapter 2, everything she finds wrong with herself that she's there to get rid of manifests into a ghostly being. She's just called part of Madeline in the game, but I'll choose to call her Madeline for now. Madeline gets into a small argument with her alter ego later in the chapter, where she's told that she's not a mountain climber and that they need to go home together, which then cuts into a chase gameplay segment that I adored playing through. You have Madeline following you for about 3 seconds behind your movement speed, and if she catches you or you run into her, you die. It gets interesting once Madeline multiplies, leaving you to really think about what to do while also going fast enough not to get caught. It's intense, quick, tricky, and fair, and in another instance, the music absolutely brings it 110%. At the end, Madeline realizes that all of the second chapter was just a dream after she's called by someone on a payphone. She then wakes up from the dream and proceeds to go to the payphone in real life to call her mother for support. Her mom actually alluding to the player that Madeline is susceptible to panic attacks, which comes into very important play later. At this time, I should also bring back up Theo. He's a hiker who came to Mount Celeste to take pictures of all the ruins and pretty sights for his followers on a fictional app, and what do you know, it's also a real-life Instagram account with official art on it. You can optionally talk to him or completely ignore him for the first 2 chapters. Choosing to do so, you get the previously mentioned comedic relief, and you also start to see that he's just a nice guy. He's very supportive of Madeline and talks very highly of her determination to climb the mountain, even though he's not very sure why she's doing it at the time. At the end of Chapter 4, Theo and Madeline get onto an old gondola to take it across a large gap in the mountain. Madeline shows that she's not very keen on the idea, but Theo manages to get her on somewhat comfortably. As they start making their way across, Madeline causes the gondola to stall and shake from side to side, causing Madeline to get angry with Theo for convincing her to get on, before being thrown into a massive panic attack. This is where my favorite part of the game takes place. Theo recognizes that she's going into a panic attack as tendrils slowly move in from the sides of the screen and she loses control of her breathing. He takes her shoulder and talks her through a method of calming her down by keeping a metaphorical feather visualized in her head. It surprised me at first, but it turns out that you actually need to control her breathing in this section to keep the feather steadily going up and down as the screen darkens and she gains control back of her breathing. Now, it's thankfully been at least a year since I've had a real panic attack, but I can say this really captures the essence of what it feels like if you're really invested in what's going on. The change of character, the walls closing in, the inability to breathe, needing lots of time to fully recover, the scene alone is worthy of such high praise. It just sucks that it's technically a spoiler, because it's done absolutely masterfully. Now on to a great gameplay and story segment, Chapter 5. You go into attempts to manifest quote-unquote what you really are through a revealing mirror, causing monsters to come out of Madeline and a crystal prison for Theo with eyes forming in the walls to stare at him. I have a soft spot for symbolism, so I really loved this part, which has a kick-ass puzzle section with needing to chuck Theo around to press buttons and escape the monsters. It's pretty tricky, but it's lots of great fun. In the first part of Chapter 6, Madeline and Theo just talk back and forth, where you actually are the one choosing the dialogue options for both characters. It's a more in-depth talk to learn a little bit more about Theo and why Madeline chose to climb up the mountain, her depression, and finally starting to open up about Madeline chasing her. And here's where I admittedly started to get a little emotional. Theo talks about how he finally thought he knew what he was going to do in his life, but it turned out not to click. During his downtime in Canada, he wasn't pressured by anyone to do anything. He just kept pressing himself to do something, but ultimately worried that he didn't know where he was going in life. This struck a personal chord with me. When I was out of high school, I was dead set on going to college for something I liked. Turns out, I grew very tired of learning the same information I already spent 2 years learning, with very little new information or projects that actually interested me in what I wanted to do. And so I ditched it. I stayed one more year to learn a little bit more of general classes and become a lifeguard and moved on. Except I didn't move on. I got stuck in a rut of not knowing what to do with myself and fearing work. I was basically just using my parents' electricity bill every day by sitting on my rear and rotting, watching YouTube videos and playing games all day to keep my sanity for months. I was scared that I didn't know where I was going to go in life. It terrified me to the core. Thankfully, I'm giving college another go now to keep myself active and working on bettering myself, but dang, the spot in this game really resonated me like crazy, even though it was only a handful of text box of Theo talking. It's insane to think that such a little thing would strike me so hard. Taking a hard right back to the game, though, Madeline falls asleep and confronts Madeline again. She says it's time to part ways. She's finally ready to rid of this negative half of herself. Madeline, of course, snaps and attacks her, even being crazy enough to burst through her text icon frame. And that's a really cool and good use of breaking the norm to cause uneasiness. Also, sad and scared Madeline physically hurts to hear. It is such a sad noise. Madeline tries to calm herself down with the feather breathing technique that Theo taught her, but Madeline basically breaks the fourth wall, cuts the feather in half, and tries to kill her other half by chucking her down the mountain. As a quick side note, there's some BS here. She should have died here, 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 and here. At the last part of this chapter, you actually fight Madeline after a crazy old woman suggests that maybe she shouldn't try and split off of Madeline, but accept her for what she is and help her change too. This boss fight is a lot of fun and really quick on some screens, but it's unfortunately also littered with one-hit kill spikes and feathers. It's really good for the most part, but there are some screens that are really just painfully annoying to get through. This is actually where Confronting Myself plays, and it's really outstanding. The upbeat music and chanting that glitches out with each time you actually land a hit on Madeline is super memorable and gets my blood pumping. After the fight, you manage to get her to stop attacking, and then she accepts that she just isn't wanted anymore. Madeline then tells her that they should start working together, and that feeling scared is okay. Madeline hesitates for a little while, but eventually accepts after a cutely illustrated hug, and then you find that they fuse, and that grants you a double jump. It's a great idea, and very, very, very important for what's coming up. Madeline and the old woman convince Madeline to work together to reach the top, and after some hesitation, she agrees. And at this point, you get one of the best pieces of art in the game. I loved it so much that you can actually hear the screenshot sound effect because I immediately smashed F12. Up next, you're finally off on the long stretch of Chapter 7 to climb the summit. The great music starts and pumps you up as even more amazing artwork shows the climb ahead. As you climb the summit, Madeline offers her help with orbs you can run into for a boost in the right direction, as well as a transitional piece to go from area to area. Going up the mountain isn't really heavy on dialogue, but you do get the women talking and supporting one another as they go up after a stage transition. After seeing the final flag, you hop up a few small patches of rocks with spikes and sit up at the peak. Here, Madeline and Madeline talk things out and acknowledge that they are going to have to work together from now on, both fearing becoming who they were again before. This part didn't really get me very much at the time because I was currently feeling bittersweet at the moment from the climb before it, but that's besides the point. Now getting the breathtaking view you've worked so hard for, you roll into the credits, where you get even more QR of the two bonding on their way back down. There's an extra scene after the credits that's basically a nice little summary of everything that you've done, having all the characters show up as Madeline bakes a pie with all the strawberries you collected during the game. It's a neat little thing to add at the end of the game that actually changes depending on how many of the berries you collected. After this, you find out that there's an 8th chapter, but I won't dive into that because I didn't get to it. I didn't collect the blue hearts required, so I'll leave that alone for now. So yeah, Celeste is one game I won't be forgetting anytime soon, if ever. But even after that much of the game, there's still so much more to its gameplay. Each chapter has a harder version called a B-side that you can unlock in hard challenges, and for even harder core fans, there's a C-side, which, to all stages, aren't as long, but are absolutely brutal. Obviously, I don't have footage for this because, you know, I didn't do that. The game's very difficult for a casual player like myself. I've played hard games before, but 2D platformers really aren't my strong suit. Most of my issues with this game are difficulty related, but that being said, I managed to beat it. In fact, after watching the AGDQ 2019 run, Punchy summed it up way better than I could.
Off a jumping system, so I describe Celeste as the hardest game that anyone can beat. That's a really good way to put it.
With that all being said, I may have initially been split over this game due to some things I don't agree with and or had issues with, but in the end, I love this game. The gameplay when you're not dealing with BS is fast and fun, some chapters are super creative, the story hooked and affected me on a personal level, the characters were memorable and mostly likable, and the OST and art were absolutely outstanding. I gotta hand it to the devs. I really wasn't expecting to love a 2D platforming game as much as I do. You did a wonderful job with the game. In closing, to anyone who hasn't played Celeste before, if you have some free time and are okay with trial and error gameplay, give it a try if you can. You might just end up getting sucked up in wanting to experience the full game for yourself, much like I did. Thank you for watching.